Welcome to the 176th episode of the Reading and Writing Podcast. I'm your host, Jeff Rutherford. Stay tuned for my interview with Suzanne Robb, author of the zombie novels Z-Boat, Zootopia, and Z-End. Stay tuned for the interview. The Reading and Writing Podcast is sponsored by the book-loving nerds at Riffle. Riffle is an online book community that connects readers with authors and books that they'll love. Readers use Riffle to find the next book that they want to read, and authors use Riffle to make their books stand out and drive sales. Join the Riffle community today at rifflebooks.com. That's rifflebooks.com, and look for the link in the show notes as well. Welcome back to the Reading and Writing Podcast. My guest today is Suzanne Robb, author of Z-Boat, a zombie novel published by Permuted Press. Suzanne, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Great. Well, can you read the first couple of pages of Z-Boat?
Sure. Let's see. Chapter 1. Igor Ivanovich made his way to the control room, the disorientation from the loss of blood making the normally easy trek difficult. He kept getting turned around and confused. The screams, fires, and leaks didn't help. A submarine taking on water was never good. He considered fire a bad thing too, and laughed at the irony of dying in a fire while several thousand feet below the ocean surface. Finally, he saw the door he'd been searching for. Igor pulled out his Makarov and slowly pushed the door open. He trusted no one and would shoot anything that moved, friend or not. Red flashing emergency lights made it difficult to see, the strobe-like effect playing tricks on him. He moved slowly and methodically to the communications panel. He tripped over what looked like a leg, but he couldn't be sure. He stopped being bothered at sights like that long ago when everything went to hell. A simple rescue mission for one of the most impressive submarines in any arsenal. They'd loaded up on supplies, and to Igor, an unusual number of scientists also joined. When they'd arrived, what they found was a floating graveyard. Igor was a simple mechanic, but he'd heard the stories. He'd even seen some of the abominations when they sent his team over to work on the engines of the other sub. One look and he knew there was nothing to be done. It had been disabled on purpose. Something had set out the bait for them to come. The first time Igor heard one of them, he cried out for the others to come help. Finally, a survivor after the trail of eviscerated bodies, but he'd been wrong. An emaciated corpse lay behind one of the engines, half-eaten, trying to snap its mouth at them. One of the men who answered his call beat the thing's head in with a wrench. When nothing but a pulpy dark mess remained, he moved on. Igor followed the man as he moved forward, crushing anything he came across. Igor told them to say nothing, that it would be their secret. Hopefully their captain would call them back aboard when he learned there was only danger and no one and nothing to salvage. When the captain ordered him to oversee a small group of people to transport the things to their sub, Igor almost disobeyed orders until he remembered they would kill his family for his indiscretion. Igor remained quiet and did as told. More and more of the corpses were found, and unknown to the rest of the crew, their lives likely to end horribly as well. No longer a safe place, the Peacemaker was now a floating lab, studying decayed things that still moved for reasons unknown. Several days later, a number of crew members went missing, only to be discovered in partial bits or attacking others, and every man for himself mentality kicked in, and within hours most of the crew succumbed to whatever it was these things had brought with them. Igor lasted as long as he could, but hunger and injury had taken their toll. He forced his mind back to the present. Dmitri Kruger sat at the guidance control, his face half-eaten and a bloody socket with strands of rotten flesh where his arm used to be. On reflex, Igor fired a shot directly into Dmitri's head. The body jerked forward and then fell to the floor. They had been best friends since elementary school. Igor moved on without a second thought. He needed to reach the communications panel. The others needed to be warned. Nothing could be done to save his shipmates, but at least he could spare others from this fate. He could tell them to stop the research. The substance they discovered wasn't what they thought it was. A scream pierced the eerie quiet of the control room. Igor halted. The pounding of his heart throbbed in his head, the rapid flow of blood making him woozy. The screams stopped, and the only remaining sounds were the moans of the things on board. Shaking off the memory lapse, he began to move forward. He felt something watching him and glanced around the room to find the source of his unease. Dimitri's eyes remained open, staring at him.
Wow.
Do you want me to keep going?
I think that's a good stopping point.
Okay.
So if someone listening hasn't heard about Z-Boat yet, how would you describe your novel?
Well, I'm using the tagline of zombies on a submarine right now, because that is the best way for me if I had to summarize it.
Gotcha.
But there's a lot of other elements, like there's a lot of character development and tension that builds up in the beginning and middle of the book as people don't know who they control. They don't know what they're doing, obviously, because this horrible thing happened, and they get tidbits of information. And so there's just a growing tension that builds and kind of explodes at the end of the book.
Gotcha. So what sparked the idea for Z-Boat? Have you always been a zombie fan?
No, I actually haven't. I saw Night of the Living Dead when I was a child, and as a result, zombies terrified me. And I really avoided the movies. I didn't read any books about it. And it wasn't until about 10 years ago, I was watching a movie, and it was on a submarine, and there was a nuclear reactor was leaking. It's a Harrison Ford movie. I can't for the life of me remember the name of it. And it's a beautiful scene. It's got this blue light, and there's opera music playing, and it just really struck me like this horrible, horrible event with this beautiful scene, and it stuck with me. And a few days later, someone convinced me to watch a zombie movie, and that scene was still in my head. And I kept thinking about it watching this zombie movie because it was like a plot of a majority of zombie movies. Something goes bad in a lab, people start dying, people start reanimating, they're zombies. And they always have this escape that I don't understand, like get in a car, go drive, run. And I thought of the submarine, and I said, wow, what if you couldn't run, if that wasn't an option, if there was no car, if there was no staircase, no attic, there was absolutely no place to hide, and you were forced to deal with the zombies at hand, like you did not have the option of running. And so those two ideas, they kind of cemented together in my head. And it took several years for me to actually think, well, maybe it could make a good book, because one of my friends convinced me to do it. And Z-Boat is the result of that.
That's great. Well, is Z-Boat the first novel you've written, or had you written others before?
It's the first novel I wrote, yes. I've done a lot of short stories, a lot of random, like creative nonfiction. I like writing stuff like that for fun.
Hmm.
But for like an actual novel, Z-Boat's the first.
And what can you tell me a little bit about your history with fiction? What originally motivated you to write short stories and kind of pursue writing?
When I was a little kid, I loved to read. I adored reading, and I lived out in the country, farm country, and I think we got two channels. One was like the farm report, one was a weather channel, and one was news. So I really didn't watch a whole lot of TV, and reading was my only escape. And because of where I lived, you read the same books over and over. So I don't know if I was a dorky child, but I would actually write little books, like for my friends and I when we would get together, and I'd write books for us to read. And that just kind of stayed with me. It'd be little short stories, or I'd see something I would think was funny with animals, and I'd make a story about it. And I really kind of kept up with that and writing ideas down. And then once I got into college, I stopped, unfortunately. But as soon as I got out of college, a couple of my teachers, they approached me and they said, some of the essays we get, they were very creative from you. They were fun to read. And, hope you do something with that. And so I kind of said, oh, well, maybe they say this to everybody. And then I ran into someone who is a writer, and I told him about, just a couple ideas I had. And he told me, he says, you know what, you should really just put some of these on paper and see what happens. And so maybe 10 years ago, I started doing these like nonfiction stories just for fun. It was to cheer up someone I was dating, when they had a bad day. It was like, okay, here's a fun story, read it. It's an embarrassing moment of my life. And, didn't mind sharing it with them. And that actually kind of got the writing bug going in me, and I continued with it. And then it turned into fiction when one of my friends said, some of these ideas you have would be a really great fit for this anthology or that anthology. And until that point, I didn't even know what an anthology was. I had no idea. I was like, what are you even talking about? And he showed me about this, and he showed me the forums and the anthology calls. And so I had to learn all about, guidelines and how to format and do this, that, and the other. But I loved it because, they would say this is what it's about, but you got to be creative, and that's what I love most about it, is kind of thinking outside the box. And that's what sparked my interest.
That's great. So when you finished writing Z-Boat, what was the path to publication once you finished the book?
Uh, Honestly, it was a nightmare. Um, like I finished the book, I felt so accomplished. I'm like, yes, I'm our author. Here, someone publish it, and it doesn't work that way. And I did find a publisher. They really wanted it. They thought that it was a very good idea that hadn't been done before. Unfortunately, that publisher, they kind of bit off more than they could chew, and there was just a lot of problems, and they ended up closing down about 3 months after Z-Boat was put out, and I
Oh,
had to get the rights back. And then I was like, okay, well, what am I going to do now? Because now they're calling it a reprint, even though it had only been out for a few months. And I was like, okay, what am I going to do? What am I going to do? So I completely revamped it. I rewrote it. I added in characters. I altered the ending just a little bit. I added about 15 or 16,000 words to kind of give more meat to the to tension and the ending scene, because I know people like their zombies. And it was, to me, it felt like a much different book, a much more professional book. And I was contacted by Permitted Press, actually. Jacob sent me an email asking if Z-Boat was available. And I said, yeah, of course. And he said that he wanted to have it. And I was completely floored because, Permitted Press is, it's the press everybody wants to go to if they have a zombie novel. And I honestly didn't think I was even remotely good enough. And so to have them contact me, it was a very, very happy moment in my life.
that's great.
And since then, it's been a total ease with the publishing thing.
That's wonderful. So have you written sequels to Z-Boat?
Yeah, there are two sequels. The second one actually comes out later this month. It's called Zootopia, and the third one is called Z End, and that comes out. I believe they're scheduling it for sometime in August.
Gotcha. And will Zootopia, will that take you off the submarine, or will it still be set on the submarine?
No, Zootopia is going to take you off the submarine about 2 weeks after the initial outbreak, and it's going to be kind of like the play on names like Z-Boat. It's a play on U-Boat because it takes place on a submarine. Zootopia is a play on Utopia.
Right.
It's kind of like the main character from Z-Boat. She's going to realize that the world that she left a few weeks prior is no longer exists, and it's this kind of chaotic zombie utopia where the people in charge refuse to admit that they've lost control. And so there's lots of infighting and a lot of politics where people are trying to wrestle control of countries from others, not realizing the true severity of what's coming along with these zombies.
That sounds very interesting. So, were you already planning those sequels when you were writing Z-Boat, or did it kind of did the ideas come to you as you were working on Z-Boat?
After I wrote Z-Boat, I had pretty much wanted it to. I thought it would be like a standalone novel, but even though it was only out for about 3 months, it got such an enormous response that I must have gotten probably 100 different emails from various people who had read it asking me when the next one was going to come out. And I honestly didn't think it was going to have that much of an effect, but people, they really liked the main character and the concept. And so I started thinking, okay, well, if I can't do this on a submarine again, I've got to do something new. So I took it above land, and instead of having the typical zombie outbreak where, there's just these hordes of undead, my zombies are a little bit different, and I made the enemy all around people. It's your friend, it's your enemy, it's your neighbor, it's the politicians, it's the government, it's the police on top of the zombies. Like, there's no one you can really trust. And I kind of had a lot of fun doing that because it's in Zootopia, you don't know who you can trust. And at the very end, there's another twist like with Z-Boat. And I kind of enjoyed doing that. And that's what motivated me with Z End. I was like, okay, I want to finish this. I want this to end the series, but I kind of wanted the book to go full circle, the series.
Hmm.
And so Z End, it starts out on land, but it goes back to at the very end of the book, you're back on the submarine. And so the whole scenario comes full circle.
That's interesting. So, what are you working on now? What are you writing?
Well, I've got 3 different novels. The one I just finished now, it's a science fiction cryosleep book. The premise is the world's population, it gets to be too much. So as a solution, they put human beings into cryosleep, and you have to serve like a 10-year sentence. And when it comes up, you have to work for a specific amount of time, and then you go back into cryosleep. And as soon as you've kind of worked off your time, you're allowed to go above ground onto the earth where it's been talked up by everybody that's your boss, saying it's wonderful. There's beaches, there's blue sky, there's this, that, and the other. And nothing is really quite as it seems. Like I invented an illness. I call it cryopsychosis. And, people that have gone through this process a few too many times, they kind of lose their minds and go crazy. And the main character, he's one of those people. He's on his 10th rotation, and he doesn't know if he's being paranoid or if he's really seeing what he's seeing. And so I had a lot of fun with that. And again, I'm not going to spoil the twist because Sure. I really like the twist at the end of the book, but that was a lot of fun to write too.
That's great. That's great. So what books or writers have you read in the last year or so that impressed you and that you would recommend?
Let's see. I read Silver Linings Playbook by Matthew Quick. Mm-hmm. I thoroughly enjoyed that book. Another one. I read Warm Bodies by Isaac Marion, and I liked that one a lot. I read Wool by Hugh Howey, Gotcha. And I thought that was a great book. Sacre Blue by Christopher Moore, but I'm a huge Christopher Moore fan.
Gotcha. So what writers, not necessarily in the last year, but what writers are kind of inspirations for you if you're having a bad day of writing or just want to that you kind of go back to over and over? Who are some of those writers or books?
Christopher Moore, Jasper Fforde, Gregory Maguire, and yeah, I would have to say those 3 for sure. Those are my top 3.
Great. Well, given your success to date with Z-Boat and the short stories that you've had published, what advice would you have for aspiring writers who may be listening who would want to have their own work published?
I have a lot of people message me and say, oh, I write in my free time. I think I could be a writer. And it's one, I think the most important thing is if you want to be a writer, write. Get that idea that you have, get it onto paper, and buy books on editing, because I think that's the one problem when I do beta reading or proofreading for people. The biggest problem I see is grammatical, spelling errors, just really random things that an aspiring writer doesn't understand, that an agent or a publisher, if they see that on the first page, they're not going to bother continuing to read. So my advice is get that idea onto paper and buy Elements of Style, read it, learn your grammar, learn your prose, and read a lot of books. Just fill your head with as many different writers, as many different genres as you possibly can, because it'll help you in the long run.
That's great advice. Well, where can people find you online if they're interested in learning more about you?
Well, my website, it's SuzanneRobb.com, and I'm on Twitter at @srobb76, and I'm on Pinterest. It's srobb76 again, and I'm on Google Plus as Suzanne Robb, and I have a Facebook author page.
Great. And I'll have links to those in the show notes as well that people can check out. Well, again, we've been speaking with Suzanne Robb, author of the horror novel Z-Boat. Z-Boat is available now in bookstores or as an ebook, so go buy a copy. And Suzanne, thanks for doing this interview.
Oh, no problem. Thanks for having me.
Great. Thanks a lot.
Right now, 1 in 7 people around the world needs a pair of glasses but can't get them. That's why OneSight exists, to help people everywhere get the glasses they need to learn more, earn more, and see a clearer future. How can you support OneSight's mission in communities around the world? All it takes is a simple donation to improve someone's life by giving them clear vision. Donate today at onesight.org. That's ONESIGHT.org.
Here's to getting back together, to planned lunches and unplanned cookouts, to grandma's recipes and smells that take us back, to passing down plates and traditions. Here's to warm embraces and familiar faces, to your best friends becoming best friends, to scheming, dreaming, and food still steaming. Here's to laughter and love, to growing closer than ever. For all of life's get-togethers, Chinette, here's to us.